Hi, wow, it's such an honor to be here. I've been a huge fan of ILWU for a long time. To give a little background on what we deal with as railroad workers, we work under a different safety act and a different labor act than other workers. So our unions really started as a widows and orphan fund for the railroad workers that were killed on the job. The average lifespan of a brakeman was about 2 or 3 years after hiring out with the railroad 100 years ago. So it's a very dangerous job. And traditionally, when a worker was injured on the job or killed on the job, the carriers would immediately lock the scene down, sequester all the witnesses, get statements, and find some way to blame the employee for his or her own death. And this is a tradition that continues to this day, unfortunately. In 2007 and 2008, we were finally able to get legislation, thank you, which offered some degree of protection for us, both when we were injured on the job and when we filed safety complaints against the company. Because we were getting fired. We were losing our injury claims. Under the Federal Employee Liability Act, which is different than workers' comp, whatever you get in compensation for your injury is based on your liability versus the company's liability. So for an example, if you're injured on the job and they do an investigation and they find that you were 90% to blame for your own injury, whatever reward you would get would be reduced by 90%. So the railroads have a very vested interest in making sure that they blame the workers. And in addition to this, whenever they have to report an injury to the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA comes in and there's increased scrutiny on the terminals. So it's also at the benefit to local management to make sure that either you're so scared to report an injury that you won't do it, or in some cases they actually get compensated for reduced injury numbers. They get bonuses for us not reporting injuries. So again, this 2007-2008 Federal Railroad Safety Act made it illegal under federal law to retaliate against workers who are injured on the job or report safety complaints. I was injured on November 16th, 2008. I was one of the first people who was able to file one of these whistleblower acts against my company, BNSF. I was injured through no fault of my own. And as always happens, all of the witnesses were sequestered. They had the downloading from the locomotive within 2 or 3 hours of the accident. Management followed me out to the hospital, attempted to get into my room several times. I kicked them out. I asked security to make sure they left because they had no right to be there under many federal laws. So they decided to have an investigation on me and the person who injured me. The person who injured me received no discipline. I was disciplined for, the only thing they could really find that I did wrong was that they have like a 4-inch rule book. So they said that my conduct was not to their liking. And so I received a level S, which is considered a serious violation. And I was basically on probation for a year if I did anything wrong. If they thought that I did anything wrong, I would have been permanently fired. It was a year and a half before I could go back to work, though, because of the extent of my injuries. So, but under the Federal Railroad Safety Act, even sending me a letter telling me that they're having an investigation based on my injury was against the law. Unfortunately, as we've heard from the previous speaker, OSHA has very, very few inspectors. My investigation took over a year and a half, the initial investigation, and they found in my favor that in fact BNSF had retaliated against me, and I was supposed to be compensated. It was somewhere in the arena of $324,000 for pain and suffering and punitive damages against the company. From this point, the local findings get sent to Washington, D.C., and it has to be approved by the Department of Labor at that level. That took another year. 30 days later, after they released their findings, also in my favor, the railroad, as they have done in every single case, decided to appeal. So at that point, you have another 180 days, and if you don't hear from the administrative law judge, who is the one that oversees the appeals, you have the right to go to a jury trial with this case. We did not hear anything for 180 days and decided to go to jury trial. At that point, the investigation, the year and a half that OSHA spent investigating you, it's gone. It's like it never happened. You go to a de novo trial. The railroad can get as much information as they want about you. I was pretty scared. The railroad tactics, you know, they put cameras in the trees. They follow you around. You have no privacy whatsoever. It's extremely stressful. So I would say another year and a half later, we finally went to trial. The jury did find in my favor, but because we weren't able to submit anything from the initial OSHA investigation, they got about 10% of the information that was discovered by those OSHA investigators. And additionally, these are people that are, you know, they were in retail. They didn't know anything about the railroad industry. They didn't know the history, how long this has been going on, how horrible the retaliation is. We weren't able to get any of that in. We weren't able to say that the railroad lied to the federal administration and said I caused my own injury by sneezing. We got that, and I was reading that, like, what? Where did they pull this from? You know, we couldn't bring any of that into the case, and they found in my favor. They said, yeah, the railroad did sort of retaliate against you, but they didn't feel that punitive damages were warranted, and all that they gave me was $20,000 in pain and suffering, and which is taxed, by the way, pain and suffering. And that's it. So to me, I'd liken it to somebody comes and steals your car, and the police come and they do a thorough investigation, and they say, yes, this person did steal your car. We saw this. Here's the report. Good luck. And then you're on your own, and it's your responsibility to find a lawyer. And maybe you can go through the court process 6 years later. That's how long mine took, 6 years later. And maybe they'll find that this person did in fact steal your car. And then they just get away with it. They walk away. If you or I broke federal law, we would be in jail. If BNSF breaks federal law, nothing happens to them. Nothing. There's no teeth. There's absolutely no teeth in this law. It's better than what we had, but I work with people who injure themselves on the job, who are already in trouble for something else, who say that they did it at home. So they don't have to have the scrutiny, so they won't get fired, they won't lose their jobs. And it's outrageous. It's something that I'm very passionate about, that, you know, we need to come together and, one, share information. Whistleblowers don't have any information. In my particular case, the judge and OSHA ordered BNSF to post at every location, every yard office, our rights under the Federal Railroad Safety Act. That has never happened. I have company officials in court who said, absolutely, we have posted this. I have never seen this in any office. You have to get the information by knowing somebody who went through it. There's no teeth. So we are actually hoping to have another congressional hearing about this. There's been over 1,000 whistleblowers that have filed complaints with OSHA against the railroad. Out of those 1,000 since 2008, 2 of us have actually made it to federal court and have prevailed. The other person had a much better jury than I did and was actually compensated as we are supposed to be per the law. But everyone else, you know, you're people that are fired for reporting safety complaints, they're fired. It doesn't matter if OSHA tells the railroad to reinstate these people immediately. They just appeal and appeal and appeal. And I work up in Seattle with people Curtis Rucaird, he's getting quite a bit of press, which is great.
Who's that again?
Curtis Rucaird, and he's a conductor of BNSF. He was fired for doing an inspection of an oil train, which management felt that he didn't need to do. They actually fired him for performing a safety inspection on an oil train. We have many, many cases of people who are being retaliated against for simply saying, we feel that this is a danger. And so you have BNSF on one hand saying, we care about safety. You know, we absolutely, safety is our number one, and this is an Indian industry, of course. You have signs up, you have management telling you that safety is number one. And yet, when it comes right down to it, we're all in danger, all of us, every single one of us. I just found out Thursday that there have been 2 general chairmen of the United Transportation Union, which merged with the sheet metal workers for some reason. They're now called SMART. 2 general chairmen have been meeting in secret with BNSF the last 18 months and came forward with a proposal for single-person crews on the BNSF railway, 1 person on a train. Traditionally, it used to be 5 people on a crew. And then now it's a conductor and engineer.
How many cars on a train?
It depends, up to 110.
And they're transporting crew?
They're transporting every hazmat material you could possibly imagine. And I worked as a road conductor for several years before I'm working in the yard, but a big part of our job was keeping each other awake because we're working 12-hour runs. They can't work us more than 12 hours, but they will definitely work you 12 hours. You're, you know, it maybe takes 2 more hours to get to the hotel room, and then you have 8 hours to sleep. The sleep is erratic. It's all over the place. 3 o'clock in the morning one day, 2 p.m. the next day. You have maybe 12 hours off between your runs. You're working 80 hours a week. You can't take any time off because you'll be disciplined if you take more than 1 day off a month, in my case, under my agreement. So we're tired. We're really tired. And now they have this technology called positive train control, which is great. Railroaders love positive train control. If your train goes by a signal and you don't reduce the speed and you're supposed to stop the next signal, this technology, through GPS will actually put an application of brakes on these trains. So you won't run through it and kill yourself and kill everybody else. And if there's another train coming. We love the technology. We absolutely don't want to depend on it for running these trains by ourselves. It hasn't been perfected. We're still in the testing process, but all the railroads can see is we can reduce our workforce by half. That is 50% more people we don't have to give benefits to. So these, we know this. We know that one-man crews are bad, but we didn't think that this would come so quickly, and we didn't think that it would come through our own union, negotiating in secret with no input from us. We have about a month before they send the ballots out. It would be implemented by January 1st, 2015. And it's been kind of crazy the last few days. Like I said, we just found out about it. A lot of the general chairmen that learned about it earlier than us were sworn to secrecy. They could not tell us about it till Thursday. That's how our unions operate. We're not very democratic, but I was in Chicago, and I talked to Steve. There's another interview with me in Chicago. I was at the Workers United convention. So we're a caucus of the 14 different railroad crafts, both the operating crafts and dispatchers and van drivers. And so we created this just to share information, because traditionally our unions have fought each other, especially the engineers and conductors. They've done horrible things to each other. And a lot of the older guys remember this, and so this sort of news comes along with the one-man crews, and all they want to do is bash the union that is endorsing this. But we're smarter than that. The rank and file is starting to get it, that these things hurt all of us, and the carriers love it when we fight each other, because then we're not fighting the company. And so I'm really optimistic. We're hoping to, we are actually going to have an event that these 2 general chairmen are going to be in Seattle on July 30th to try to sell this proposal to the workers. And I'm actually I'm a conductor, but I'm with the engineers union, so I don't have a vote on this, but I figured I'll invite some of my friends, some of my longshoremen and Teamster friends and several others to come out in the community that's going to be affected by this, because everyone is going to be affected by this. These are dangerous trains going through your towns. You're going to be affected by this. So we're having a rally, an event on July 30th, 5 o'clock, SeaTac Red Line Hotel. We'll have more information on the railroadworkersunited.com webpage about that and about our struggle, and we're hoping that we can defeat this, for everyone. My personal history, I got involved in activism at the WTO protest by being tear gassed for 3 hours, so that really made me mad, and I started getting involved, and I was like a typical Generation Xer. I didn't read the news or think that there was anything I could do. I just felt hopeless and helpless. And so we started out, after the WTO left town, doing these coalitions between environment and labor groups. And it's really challenging because, a lot of the environmentalists, they want no fossil fuels, zero whatsoever. Those are our jobs. And so it's this fine line that you have to walk. But to me, it's a natural progression that we all understand that the same people who exploit the environment are exploiting labor. So these are the same people. We have these common enemies, and we might have different ways of thinking about the future, but ultimately if we don't join together and fight big money, fight people like Warren Buffett, we're gonna lose everything, especially in our workforce. So, I'm still trying to figure out how to have that conversation, how to have that dialogue, but obviously we need to be helping each other in whatever ways we can. And on our website, Railroad Workers United, we have lots and lots of information on whatever topic you can possibly come up with on fatigue, especially. Fatigue is a huge issue among railway workers. And it's gonna be different for freight than passenger. We don't, necessarily have the same problems, but we have the common understanding of what our jobs are like and how dangerous they are. So that would be the best resource that I can come up with. We have flyers, we have brochures, we have buttons, we have stickers, we have shirts, we have, whatever you need. And that's how the best way to hook yourself up and get on a listserv and get updated. White versus BNSF. If you look up White versus BNSF, she won in the Supreme Court against BNSF for harassment on the job. Her story is awful. Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. Sheila White. I'm sorry, Sheila, I love you. So she went through years and years of harassment, and management did nothing, and she was eventually fired, and she made it all the way to the Supreme Court and won a landmark case in terms of discrimination. And it's the same thing, with this one-man crew agreement, and losing half of our workforce. That's half of what they're going to pay into retirement. And so there's not going to be a retirement for people like me. And of course, every year the federal government is trying to get into our retirement. There's all this propaganda that somehow it's costing the taxpayers nothing. So that's another issue too that we have to deal with, is our retirement and how long that we can really work. It's a very physical job. I can't see myself out on the ballast hanging on the sides of cars when I'm 65 years old, but I don't feel like I'm going to have a choice, if I'm going to collect a full retirement. So.
And are retired railroaders get medical benefits being protected so far?
Yeah, which of course we give away, every contract battle, we give some of that away, but yeah. Yes?
Couple of questions.
Actually was instrumental in having the last successful nationwide strike, around the Pullman Porters workers. And he was able to get solidarity, not among all unionists, but certainly in greater scope than had ever been done before. Because like I said, traditionally the engineers think that their craft is better than the conductors, and of course they're both better than the carmen. And Eugene Debs said, this is ridiculous. We are all working class. We all need to be finding together. And it really worked, which is why it's now against the law for us to strike. If we go on strike, we have to ask permission first for a really long time. And then if we get to a point where they say, okay, we'll give you permission, the National Guard would then come in and supposedly run the trains for you. And so it hasn't been done. We're not allowed to strike because we would shut the country down, and they know it, and they did, so.
Wildcats.
Yeah, you know, we have a very large rule book. It's a lot of rules, you know, to operate trains. Not that I'm saying anything, but, you know, we do work safe, and sometimes you have to work a little bit safer.
Do you have another question?
I'm certainly no expert in it, but it's the Federal Employees Liability Act is what we fall under, as opposed to workman's comp. So if you want to look into some of the history of how we came into that would be the name of the law. I'm certainly no expert in it. I mean, I've had to fall under it for a long time, but in some ways it's better. Workman's comp, you know, you lose an arm, then you get 75 grand. Like it's set, you know, like what you get, what you're compensated for. And of course, they're still trying to find something that you did wrong. But in our case, you know, when we file a claim under the Federal Employees Liability Act, it's sort of the sky's the limit. And there have been railroaders that have gotten millions of dollars in compensation for loss of life or loss of limb. It's very, very far and few between. Those are the ones that you read about on the internet, and it kind of makes you think, you know, oh, you know, I'm going to file this claim. In my case, I did not get compensated. Supposedly I did. I settled out of court so I could pursue this whistleblower claim because they were going to be colliding with each other in bad ways and in legal terms and that I don't even understand. So, you know, I settled. But I was certainly not compensated for my injury. And there have been a number of derailments lately, you know, due to track, and that's normal. That's, you know, we're running very, very heavy trains, and in Washington State, we're running very heavy trains over track that are not designed to run heavy trains on. We're doing it because it saves the company money, and I mean, we have really good track inspection in terms of comparison with, you know, say other short lines where they've had some derailments. We have track inspectors out there, but accidents happen, and when accidents happen on the railroad, they're catastrophic. And it's to me, it's a matter of time. You know, a lot of these derailments with the oil trains that have been exploding we've luckily been in remote areas, but you know, one going through Seattle, that's devastating. It's just a matter of time, and we know it. We don't want to run these trains. We don't, and we certainly don't want to run 13 a day. But Warren Buffett has a lot of stake in extracting these fossil fuels, which are now getting burned in India and in China, further eroding the environment. And you know, it's time that people get together and say, hey, you know, you have the ability you have the money to put into alternative forms of energy. Why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we demanding that of